Hun Sen was born in 1952 in a small village on the banks of the Mekong River in Kampong Cham province. I've been there a couple of times. It's quite a beautiful sweep of the Mekong. Um, uh, his family was they were rice and tobacco farmers. He was by the standards of rural Cambodia in the 1950s. Hun Sen's family was relatively well off, although by the time he was a child, they had fallen on hard times. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, Hun Sen, uh, the details of his early life are fairly obscure, as you would expect for many rural Cambodians of that period. There's not a lot of documentation. Um, but we know that he went in the mid 1960s. He went to Phnom Penh to attend high school. There was no high school locally, and so his parents scraped all their pennies together and sent him off to Phnom Penh, where he boarded at a pagoda and did some tasks there, a much mythologized episode in his life story, and then attended high school. After that, we think that he left high school probably in 68 or 69. It's still there are different versions of the story of exactly when Hun Sen left. He went back to Kampong Cham, and he moved around a little bit in the subsequent years. The interesting question from this period is exactly when he got involved with the resistance, the communist insurgency first against Sihanouk, Prince Sihanouk's government prior to 1970, and then that waged war against the republic that replaced Sihanouk that year. Hun Sen claims that he joined the communist insurgency after Sihanouk was overthrown in the coup and issued a call to arms to the Cambodian people to rise up. There is some evidence that he may have become involved in some manner prior to then, but of course this is a politically sensitive question given the idea that he would have opposed Sihanouk consciously prior to 1970. I think that that would put him on the wrong side of a question, an important question in contemporary Cambodian history, and so he's downplayed any involvement prior to 1970. And after that, he becomes involved in the communist insurgency. He rises through the ranks and participates in the final offensive on Phnom Penh, which fell to the Khmer Rouge in April of 1975. In 1972, Cambodia was in the midst of an increasingly fierce civil war between the communist insurgents, backed by the Vietnamese communist movement next door. And of course, there were many Vietnamese communist troops that were based in Cambodia at the time and waging their war on the southern government in Saigon from these redoubts in the inside Cambodia. And of course, this was the reason that the United States initiated a massive bombing campaign of eastern Cambodia, which devastated large parts of the country and led tens of thousands of people to flee into the city. By 1975, Phnom Penh had swollen to twice its pre-war size, and the eastern part of the country that Hun Sen grew up in was totally upended and devastated by the war, even before the nightmare of the Khmer Rouge. Hun Sen, I think, at this stage, I mean, he would have experienced a lot of this stuff personally. I believe it's well documented that when the US and the Republic of Vietnam Army invaded Cambodia to try and drive out the Vietnamese communists that were using parts of eastern Cambodia as a base, Hun Sen actually took part in an engagement with American and South Vietnamese troops. He also would have experienced, probably on numerous occasions, the terror of the B-52 bombings of that time. And so this was a country that had successfully been kept out of the Vietnam War through the 1960s. Prince Sihanouk had been fairly skillful in playing a fairly limited hand diplomatically in order to preserve Cambodia's neutrality and keep the war from encroaching on his borders. But eventually, even someone as politically skilled as Sihanouk was unable to keep the country from sliding into civil war. And the coup of 1970 that overthrew Sihanouk while he was overseas and led to his former prime minister Lon Nol taking over and declaring a republic. That pushed the civil war into what was then sort of a latent or incipient civil war into an open fight between the communist insurgents and the or a more serious fight, I should say, between the communist insurgency and the new republic. When Sihanouk issued his call to arms to the Cambodian people to rise up, that led huge numbers of ordinary people to flock to the banner of the Khmer Rouge, which Sihanouk now headed formally, to his great regret, I think. But that was a key turning point in contemporary Cambodian or modern Cambodian history. This is the point at which the Khmer Rouge went from a fairly ragtag outfit that probably didn't have the ability to seriously threaten to take over, but fortified with Sihanouk's godly aura, they made fairly rapid headway. And of course, they weren't helped by the corruption and incompetence of the Khmer Republic, which there was a lot of bad decisions made in how the civil war was waged. There was a huge amounts of corruption that undermined the war effort. And by 1975, the communist armies had Phnom Penh virtually, and most of the provincial capitals virtually encircled. And Hun Sen played a role in the final push, although he was injured by shrapnel and lost his eye, and that put him out of commission for the period of the so-called liberation of Phnom Penh of April 17, 1975. We don't know a huge amount. I mean, I think we can say with confidence that Hun Sen was not an ideological communist. Even if he was involved with the resistance prior to 1970, I don't think he did so out of a conviction that the existing order needed to be overturned and a radical utopian blueprint be implemented in its place. I think we can take him at his word when he says that he was motivated by national, like a sense of patriotism as a Cambodian to join this insurgency. And of course, he fought in the military of the Khmer Rouge. He was not a political cadre. In terms of what he did after 75, I mean, Hun Sen has consistently denied taking part in any massacres or any of the horrific episodes that we've come to associate with the Pol Pot regime. One particular episode of controversy is the repression of a Cham Muslim rebellion that broke out in the middle part of 1975 after the so-called liberation. And there are some questions as to whether Hun Sen's battalion was involved in the repression, the savage repression of that rebellion. Hun Sen claims that he wasn't, that I think he told one of his biographers that he was sick with malaria and managed to use that as an excuse not to send his troops, to take part in that crackdown. Human Rights Watch did a report in 2015 that, and they found a few people in the region that said that Hun Sen's battalion was involved. It really was inconclusive, though, as the extent to which he was. There was no paper trail, no orders that can be documented, or any other documentation that can really shed light on exactly what role Hun Sen had in the Khmer Rouge, or in particular atrocities and episodes under Khmer Rouge rule. So it's still, I mean, I think the jury is just still to some extent out about that. And I think that's potential subject for further investigation.